Good evening, my dear adventurers. It's Yisselda, your guide to tonight's tale of fantasy. Our story this evening is a slow one, like steam rising from a hot cup of tea, and quiet like the hum of Midgard's slums in the late hours of the night. Before we begin, find a nice, cozy spot and get comfortable. Perhaps you are lying down with a duvet tucked around you, or in a comfortable chair or sofa. Wherever you are, feel the weight of your body sinking into the soft surface as you relax. Close your eyes, let your shoulders drop, loosen your jaw, soften your breath, and feel the quiet settle gently around you. The world can be noisy at times, even in our own minds, but here, in this story, everything slows. Now picture yourself standing on the quiet edges of a vast sleeping city, one built high above the ground, its upper plate like a steel ceiling that hides the sky. Below that plate, in the slums of Midgard, the lights never fully go out. The city hums with life. Steam curls from broken vents. Fluorescent lights flicker against the rusted corrugated iron walls. And right in the center is a bar called Seventh Heaven, a place lit by incandescent bulbs and a few neon signs saying eggs and chips and pizza and games. In the corner there's a dartboard and a couple of pinball machines, one of which might lead to a secret basement hiding place. And behind the bar is someone who might be familiar to you, Tifa Lockheart. We join her in the late evening hours, when the world is winding down, as three unexpected guests are about to remind her of something she thought she'd forgotten. This is Tales from Beneath the Plate, set in Midgard in the world of Final Fantasy VII. In a world much like ours, called Gaia, in the eastern continent and bordering the grasslands and Junon, stood a towering city of steel and smoke. Midgard. It was held aloft on iron pillars, a smouldering contrast amongst the green fields, streaming rivers, and teeming wildlife surrounding it. The crown jewel of Shinra's ambition, its plate was a ceiling to the poor and a floor to the powerful, casting a permanent shadow over the world below in a mass of metal and industry. Midgard spread its arms in 8 great sectors, and in each sector, Marco reactors pumped the planet's lifeblood skyward, transforming it into electricity that fed towers, trains, and the sterile glow of corporate dominance. The upper plate, shimmering with neon armored steel, held the illusion of civilization aloft. Up there, people wore clean shoes, dresses and suits, enjoyed an abundance of food and entertainment, and were secure in their regular employ of Shinra Corporation. But beneath the plate, the real Midgar festered. Down where the sunlight never reached and the rain dripped long after storms had passed, the slums stretched across the wasteland of a forgotten world. There, people lived in patchwork homes with their patchwork lives, their sky stolen, their air heavy and stale, and their nights without stars. They survived not because of Shinra, but in spite of it. Crushed by the weight of the upper city, the slums crawled with life, like roots in darkness, twisting, surviving, improvising. Each sector had its own character. Sector 5 was weary and kind, with its destroyed church brimming with bright flowers and sunshine, its orphanage that burst with the laughter and sounds of children, learning and playing, and the waterfall that cascaded behind a quaint house at the end of Petal Lane. The slums of Sector 6 seemed as if they were stitched together, part carnival and nightclub, with the Honeybee Inn, where people flocked to be dazzled and entertained, part red light district with Madame M's massage parlour tucked away on a dimly lit street, and the rest filled with inns, bars, restaurants and food stalls, packed to the brim with people looking for a good time. Known as Wall Market, and despite its seediness and chaos, Sector 6 was run with a heavy hand by Don Corneo, proprietor of Corneo Coliseum, where he served as the judge, jury, and executioner of his small slum empire. In contrast, Sector 7 was alive with a different kind of energy. Through the train graveyard and along the gravel path past the scrapyard toward the heart of the Sector 7 slums, the air changed. It smelled of oil and grilled meats, and hummed with music and banter and laughter. A television blazed Shinra News 24/7 onto the street, where people occasionally stopped to watch or argue. People were competitive. The sector was filled with fighters who often held competitions amongst themselves as to who could slay the most creatures in the scrapyard each week. At the centre of Sector 7 stood a stalwart of the slums, Seventh Heaven. Famous for its hearty food and stiff drinks, it was now run by the kind and generous Tifa Lockheart, while Mal, the wife of its previous owner Monty, casually loitered outside her ground floor apartment at Stargazer Heights, smoking cigarette after cigarette, chatting casually to the passers-by as her dog dozed nearby. Seventh Heaven was more than a bar. It was a haven, a gathering place, a front for avalanche, yes, but also a front for hope. Kids would sneak in for juice and stories. Avalanche operators whispered plans from a hidden basement. Mechanics snapped in the corner, soot on their faces and hands, their clothes stained with oil. And occasionally a game of darts would get them all roused up. But not this night. This particular night was quiet. It was absent of Barrett's gruff tones, Jessie's theatrical, high-pitched laughter, Wedge's bounding and generous voice, and the gravelly and calm cadence of Biggs. And despite Tifa's concerns, Cloud had left to join them on his first mercenary job in Sector 1. Tifa knew they would be back later that night, much later. In the meantime, Tifa continued to wipe the just-washed glasses dry and put them away. The bar was now empty. The regulars had wandered off earlier than usual. Even Marlene, tucked away upstairs, was fast asleep, cozy beneath her quilt of chocobo feathers. Tifa remembered she had promised to wake Marlene and bring her downstairs to welcome her father back. Outside, Sector 7's wind whistled through the rusted sheets of corrugated metal that made up the homes of its residents. Pipes moaned. Distant footsteps echoed and vanished. Tifa stood behind the counter, drying the same glass she'd wiped 3 times already, her mind distant. Unable to stem the flow of memories that flooded back to her, she finally put the glass onto the shelf and stopped for a moment. After all this time, seeing him one day at the station, delirious, disoriented, unwell, Cloud had stumbled a little as she pulled him up from the ground where he had been sitting, slumped against the platform, a massive sword at his side. She had called to him, looked at him, brought her hands to his face and searched his eyes. Those eyes that were once a warm, deep ocean blue. Those same eyes now glowed an eerie and bright blue-green. Several moments had passed before he looked up and groaned. And then she watched on as Cloud drew himself together, slowly, uncertainly at first. It was as if parts of him were being pieced together right in front of her. His eyes focused, and he stood up, straight and tall, and he regarded her with a calmness that belied his previous state. She had been so incredibly happy to see his familiar face, of all places, right here in Sector 7. Happy to have a friend back. Yet, something was different. She couldn't quite place it. Yes, he was older, much older, as was she. But he was different. A different Cloud to the one who saved her in Mount Nebel, to the one who said goodbye to her at the water tower all those years ago. But she had pushed those feelings aside as she drew her arms tight around his torso in a warm hug. Tifa chuckled at remembering the surprise on his face. The door to 7th Heaven creaked open with a heavy groan. Tifa came to, shaking her head of her train of thought and bringing herself back to the present. A man stepped in, lean and sharp around the edges. He wore a long coat, too warm for the weather, and a cloth bandage around his right hand. His hair was flecked with grey, but his face was young, or perhaps tired in a way that didn't show in years. Tifa greeted him warmly. "Evening, what can I get you?" The man didn't answer right away. He slid onto the farthest stool and placed a handful of gill on the counter. "Whiskey, 18 years, 1 ice cube, from Calm if you have it." Tifa raised an eyebrow, her hand reaching for the best whiskey she had. She did indeed keep a special bottle of whiskey from Calm, tucked away in a closed cabinet of the drinks shelf. mainly reserved for the team on special occasions, or for customers who knew what they wanted, like this gentleman. This one was from a distillery in Calm and made from the seeds of Geisel greens, aged in fragrant barrels from the wood of the trees in the grasslands. Tifa opened the bottle and poured 3 fingers, sliding a single ice cube in before placing it in front of the man. Without another word, she filled a small glass with water and placed it next to the whiskey. He nodded, pleased. The locals told me this was the place to go for the good stuff. They were right. Tifa smiled. You clearly have good taste. She watched on as the man took a sip. She could almost see his body visibly relax in front of her eyes as the whiskey went down. Your hand okay? She asked. He nodded and grimaced. He paused before he responded. Have you ever smelt something like gas and knew it meant something worse? Tifa knew exactly what he was talking about. Marco, of course. Near Bar Casmo in Sector 8, he began. The old one, where it used to be, next to all the food stalls. There was a rupture in one of Shinra's auxiliary mains. No alarm, no warning, just that bitter stench as the Marco exploded and burned. I was there that night, not at the bar, behind it, right where the pipe broke. I used to work for them, Shinra I mean, in information security. They had me tracing avalanche routes, tracking where information might leak from. I wasn't supposed to be seen. He took a long breath before swirling the glass and taking another sip. Go on, Tifa urged, curious as to where this customer's story would lead. She knew Sector 8 well, and she had a feeling she knew the exact incident he was talking about. Then it blew, the man continued. A bracket pipe snapped from a Marco surge, sparked a fire, and slammed me into the wall. Broke my hand clean across the knuckles. Tifa grimaced. She imagined the consequences that kind of injury would do to her. She would never be able to train or fight the same way again. Then she found me, he said. Who? A girl in an apron, wearing leather gloves. Didn't even ask who I was, strong as anything. She just pulled me up like it was nothing, slung my arm around her shoulder and got me out before the fire reached the bar. He took another sip. I didn't see her face, just remembered the smell on her, exactly like those delicious steamed buns in Sector 8. They don't make them like they used to. Did she say anything to you? Tifa asked tentatively. He smiled at the memory. She didn't ask my name, didn't ask what I was doing there, just pulled me away and disappeared. He took one last sip and then stood, placing his empty glass on the bar and pushing the gill toward her, more than enough to buy at least 3 glasses of calm whiskey. Really hit the spot. Thanks for listening. Tifa watched as he turned to exit. Any time, she replied softly. The door opened and closed with its heavy, familiar thud. The man was gone. She stood still for a long moment. She didn't remember his face, didn't remember pulling anyone from the fire. But the story matched, and the timeline matched. The way her hands had been burned for a week afterward, and she had struggled through work that week at Pop's Steamed Buns cart. That matched too. And before she could think any further, the door opened again, In stepped a woman. She was elegant and precise in her clothing and the way she held herself, wearing a deep red jacket buttoned to her throat, and black gloves which seemed too tight to be for warmth. Her boots were almost silent against the wood flooring. She sat exactly where the man had, as if tracking his shadow. "Welcome," Tifa smiled to her. "What'll it be tonight?" "Hot tea, please," the woman responded. "No sugar." Tifa turned to the kettle, scooping black tea leaves into a small teapot before pouring boiling water over it. She set the pot and a cup and saucer in front of the woman. The woman didn't drink right away. She wrapped her gloved fingers around the cup and tilted her head as she looked at Tifa. "You seem familiar," she said. "Oh," Tifa responded. "How so?" "You remind me of someone, a while ago." "I've been in Sector 7 for a while now. Maybe you've seen me around," Tifa replied as she turned around to continue wiping glasses. "You ever been to Sector 8? Tifa paused. "Yes, I used to work there." The woman finally took a sip of tea and nodded to her as a look of recognition and realization crossed on her face. "I used to work for Shinra, damage control," the woman started. "One night there was a pipe rupture behind the old Bar Casmo. Destroyed the whole place. I was sent in to make sure nothing remained. No witnesses, no records, no trail." Tifa's grip on the already dry glass tightened. The woman continued, unfazed. "I didn't expect to see anyone there, or alive, but there she was, this girl, carrying people out, one after the other." The woman sighed, taking another sip before setting down her cup. "I should have reported it, should have called for backup, but..." She looked at me just once. Didn't say a word or raise a weapon, just looked, and then turned and went back in. She held up her gloved hands. "These burns took weeks to heal, but I left that night. Didn't finish the job. Never went back to work. It was just too dirty. I disappeared into the slums." She gulped down the tea again, one mouthful after another, until it was finished. "I don't know if she remembers me, but I've never forgotten her." The woman looked up at Tifa as she placed her cup down gently, her leathered glove reaching into the pocket of her deep red coat. Tifa didn't know what to say as the woman pushed a handful of gill across the bar. "People told me there was a nice lady that ran this bar. They weren't wrong." Her grip on the dish towel was tight as the woman stood up from the stool and turned towards the exit. "Have a good night." Tifa's voice trailed off as the door opened and closed again, and the woman was gone. The room was still again. She took another washed glass and began to dry it. She still had her gloves from that night, back in her room in Stargazer Heights. Warped by flame, they were in a box underneath the bed, along with other mementos and old things she'd kept throughout the years and hadn't had the heart to throw away. She hadn't known anybody else who remembered that night, and the incident remained hushed. Pops hardly spoke about the incident the next day. He had clucked his tongue and lamented at the horrible state Bar Casmo was in, then went straight back to working the stall as the customers piled up. So, as time passed by, and her hands healed, and her body recovered, She filed it away in the back of her mind. Until today. It was now nearly 10 in the evening. Barrett, Cloud, and the others would be back soon on the last train that passed through Sector 7 if things had gone to plan. Tifa didn't expect any more customers tonight, and she moved to clear the teacup from the counter when she heard the door open and close again. The last guest was younger than the previous two, mid to late teens, wiry and wild-eyed. He wore a messenger bag patched with miscellaneous decals picked up from shops across Midgar's 8 sectors. He looked around like a child stepping into a temple. Is this real? He asked, half laughing. 7th heaven? Tifa gave a smile of confusion. That's what the sign says? He sat in the stool right in front of her, beaming. Okay, I'll take... I'm a little hungry. I'll take whatever you think is best right now. It's a bit late. No problem, Tifa smiled as she headed toward the other end of the bar where the kitchen was located. Luckily, the fryer was still hot and the pan was ready. Eggs and chips okay? Sure is, the boy chimed. Tifa turned up the heat in the deep fryer. While it reached temperature, she turned on the heat under the pan and squirted a drizzle of oil, swirling it around to cover the base. She broke 2 eggs, and they began to fry, sizzling in the hot oil, the whites turning opaque and the sides bubbling. She turned the heat down and let them continue cooking, leaving the yolk a little runny. She tossed 2 handfuls of chips in the deep fryer. The oil bubbled furiously like an erupted volcano. After a few minutes, she lifted the frying basket and shook the chips of excess oil before dumping them onto a shallow plate and tossing them with salt. She slid the fried eggs over them and set the plate on the counter in front of the boy, along with ketchup and cutlery. He stared at it with reverence, reaching for his fork, and began to dig in. I've met you before. I don't think you remember, he said as he squirted ketchup in a zigzag pattern across his plate. In Sector 8, I was just a kid, like 12 at the time. I got lost in the slums. There was a Marco leak, an explosion, and then fire. People were shouting and there was smoke everywhere. I hid in the bar. He looked up, shoveling the food into his mouth as though he hadn't eaten for days. Someone found me, carried me out, just in time before the bar collapsed from the explosion. Tifa's throat tightened. 3 years. It would seem like a long time to a child. Now he would be around 15, just a year younger than Tifa when she reached Midgar. She gave me a juice box, didn't even ask for any gill. He laughed as his eating slowed. He had already demolished half the plate. I became a courier that night. Figured if someone like that could find me, maybe I could help other people find things too. Sounds like you've got things figured out, Tifa commented. The more people you know in the slums, the more opportunity there'll be. He nodded. That's exactly how I found 7th heaven. He continued to eat at a measured pace now, savouring every bite like a prayer. Just before leaving, he turned back at the open door, looking over to Tifa across the empty bar. Thanks for everything, even if you don't remember. And with that, he was gone. The room was still again. The door had closed with its familiar groan and thud, leaving behind only the hum of light fixtures, the faint rattle of a distant train, and the lingering warmth of the empty plate of eggs and chips. Tifa cleaned everything with just a few minutes to spare. The smell of oil and cleaning liquid hung in the air as she headed to the back and up the stairs, up into the small room where Marlene lay awake. "Is Daddy coming home soon?" she asked. "Very soon, sweetie," Tifa replied. "I promised I'd come get you. Let's go wait for them." Tifa scooped Marlene up into her arms, holding her little warm body close to her chest as Marlene rested her head against her shoulder. Slowly navigating her way down the stairs, Tifa finally reached the entrance to Seventh Heaven and sat down on the stairs that led to the front door. The same front door that those customers, those ghosts from the past, it seemed, had entered and left with nothing but a memory. Marlene wriggled out of Tifa's embrace, rubbing her eyes as she moved to sit beside her. A few moments passed before Tifa felt Marlene lean her small body against hers as she dozed off. Tifa smiled, her hand gently stroking the little girl's soft hair and cheeks. The night had been an odd one indeed, and full of ghosts. She'd held the boy the same way she'd held Marlene as she brought her downstairs those 3 years ago. He'd been small for his age, which was not uncommon for a child of the slums. He was frightened and shivered as she shielded him from fire and falling debris from the bar. She looked down at her hands. There were no more burns, no dirt, no scars that she could see. But the weight of that night, the weight of being remembered, settled over her like a shawl drawn across her shoulders. She hadn't remembered their names or known their paths. She didn't even know if she had made a difference. All she knew was that her single acts of heroism, free of thought, of reward, had been held closely to the hearts of those she had saved. And their memories had come to remind her of the good she had done. She knew that deep within, her intentions were still good, despite her feelings of confliction with Avalanche's plans to bomb each reactor, one by one. She sat for a few moments in silence, Marlene breathing softly at her side, on the wooden steps of her bar, the bar she had worked so hard to buy. She had worked day after day at Pop's steamed bun stall in Sector 8, and in the evenings ran to Seventh Heaven to help Mal and Monty before he passed. Memories swelled inside her, a tapestry woven of everything she had experienced in her short life, from the security of her parents' house in Nibelheim, to her home being torn apart and the village being burned to the ground, to coming to Midgar. Amid the chaos, the horror, the destruction, she felt comfort in knowing she stood steadfast in her strength and spirit, and proud to have achieved everything she had, despite the circumstances. The familiar sound of heavy boots approaching broke Tifa from her reverie. She glanced up. Down the main path that led toward the train station, she could see Barrett's hulking form shadowed by the night and lit by the incandescent lighting of the front entrance as he drew closer. A few meters behind, Cloud followed, walking almost casually. Tifa waved to them as they approached, and she nudged Marlene's dozing form next to her. "Marlene?" Marlene gasped, hopping up from Tifa's side and bounding down the stairs, pausing just at the bottom. "Daddy, you're home." "Welcome back," Tifa said to them, as Barrett laughed and scooped Marlene up into his arms. She giggled loudly as they headed into the bar, their makeshift home. Cloud followed closely behind, ascending the front steps. His expression was inscrutable as ever, but Tifa pushed the gnawing feeling in her gut aside, happy to see him once again. She paused at the open entrance, turning to him. "You made it." Cloud grunted in response. Tifa noticed a flash of yellow against his dark blue uniform. It was a flower, a golden lily to be exact, tucked against his chest underneath the left brace of his soldier uniform. The last time she'd seen one was years ago, in Sector 8. A girl used to sell them once in a while, though she no longer remembered how she looked, or even knew her name. She never bought them. Money was too tight to spend on such luxurious things. But she remembered the sweet, gentle fragrance that lingered in the air. The flower looked so out of place that she almost didn't register it. "Where did you get that?" Tifa asked, pointing. "I can't remember the last time I saw a real one." Cloud paused. She didn't expect an answer, not really. Cloud didn't explain things easily. But then he reached for it, slid it out from under his brace, and held it out to her. Tifa looked at him unexpectedly and noticed the corner of Cloud's lips tilting up, in the tiniest hint of a very faint smile. "How sweet!" Her fingers gently grasped the stalk as she took it. It was still warm from his chest. "When did you get so thoughtful?" "A guy can change. It has been 5 years," he responded. "Huh?" Tifa looked at him. 5 years ago she would have been back in Nibelheim, before the soldiers came. Cloud returned her confused gaze. Tifa shook her head. "I need to talk to Barrett," Cloud said, breaking the silence. "Right," Tifa said. "Come on in." She waved him through into 7th Heaven and headed towards the bar, Cloud following. Tifa's head was a garbled mess of memories. Memories of childhood, of the reactor, her friends, Cloud. His words echoed through her mind. She didn't recall seeing Cloud 5 years ago in Nibelheim. The last time she saw him was at the water tower, right in the centre of the village square that overlooked their houses. How old would they have been then? 13? 14? He was always a shy boy, gentle and quiet. It had surprised her when he said he wanted to leave Midgar and become a soldier. And seeing him now, it looked like he had. Yet he was different. He didn't react the way she had expected when she first saw him, the way long-lost childhood friends should greet each other after years apart. Tifa took an empty glass, not a vase, not ideal, but it would do. She filled it with water, gently set the flower in, and placed it by the register, where the soft light from the hanging bulb made it glow like a tiny sun. It lit the wood and warmed the air, changing the room in a way she didn't expect. She glanced at Cloud again. She had been anxious about him leaving for the Sector 1 mission, after the way she had found him in his state of confusion. But now, seeing him return, and seeing the faintest smile he had on his lips as he handed her the flower. Tifa smiled, looking down at the flower that now rested in its glass. Maybe he was still in there, somewhere. The old Cloud. Cloud nodded to the flower. They say it's a symbol of reunion. Reunion. The word landed somewhere deep. They stood there, surrounded by the low hum of the bar, the news playing in the background on the television, Barrett and Marlene chatting, father and daughter, together again. For a little while, in the space between heartbeats, it was just her, Cloud, and the golden lily blooming brightly between them. Thank you, my dear friends, for listening to this tale from beneath the plate of a young woman having gone through much pain and hardship, being reminded of the strength and kindness she has within, and of two long-lost childhood friends reunited once more, not yet knowing the unknown journey ahead of them. If you enjoyed this tale, I invite you to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Your support will help my new channel bloom as I craft and narrate more stories to ease you into peaceful slumber. Now, let the lights dim, let the air cool, let the flower remain in your thoughts, glowing soft and golden on a wooden bar in a city that doesn't sleep. Sleep well, and may the ones who carry flowers in their hearts always find their way back to you.